Ballets Russes was an amazing company that came into existence at the beginning of the 20th century that really transformed performing arts right way across the board. I think it's probably the most influential company, performing arts company, that has ever existed. Officially, it's founded in 1911 and continues to 1929. It is a company mainly of dancers who were trained in Russia, but it exclusively performs in Western Europe and America, North and South. The productions, the majority of which are created for the company, have wonderful music using composers of the stature of Stravinsky and Prokofiev. The productions are designed by the great artists such as Picasso, Derain and Henri Matisse, so we are talking about big names. And the finest dancers and choreographers working with these people. Diaghilev, who really establishes this company, was somebody who realised that dance in Western Europe in particular was fairly moribund at that time. And so he totally revitalises the art of dance. It's interesting because I think, left to his own devices, his interest was really opera. But he realised if he was going to make a mark, dance was the area that he could really do it in. Tamara Karsavina, I think, is one of the most fascinating dancers with the Ballets Russes. She had trained at the Imperial Ballet School. She was a member of the Imperial Ballet, and at the point when Diaghilev was establishing the Ballets Russes, she'd just risen to principal status, so she was recognised as a ballerina. The very first dance programmes that Diaghilev is putting on in Paris in his 1909 Saison Russe, he invites Karsavina to be one of the ballerinas. Diaghilev had intended Anna Pavlova to be his ballerina, and she featured on the posters, but Karsavina was there right from the start. She was being partnered by Václav Nijinsky, and she captured the imagination and the interest of the Parisian audience. Well, this actual costume was created for Tamara Karsavina when she performed the role of Salome. It's created for her actually in 1913, so it's actually the season when The Rite of Spring was premiered. So this came about because Karsavina was upset that she wasn't getting as many leading roles as she wanted, and so Diaghilev decided a Salome for Karsavina would be perfect. The costumes actually are made in St. Petersburg. They're made by a firm called Café, and they were a leading costumier working partly for the Imperial Theatre. The costume is designed by Serge Sudeikin, a Russian designer and artist, and it's the first time he's worked for the Ballets Russes. So although there are elements that you can see are very Ballets Russes, particularly in some of the fabrics, some of the, for example, the metallic fabrics that are incorporated, it's also quite different from the others. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so exciting. Salome actually appears in the Bible, and she is dancing for Herod, and as a result of this, John the Baptist is beheaded. So it's a very basic reference, it's a very brief reference in the Bible, but this reference became fascinating. Who was Salome? What did she dance? It intrigued, for example, Oscar Wilde. And at the end of the 19th century, he writes his play that, of course, is banned in Britain and gets actually mounted in France. And then that inspires a huge range of interest. For something that barely is performed, it's hugely influential. Diaghilev was somebody who was fascinated by so many people, and one of the people on the list of who he wanted to meet was Aubrey Beardsley. And with this production, certainly Beardsley provided the initial inspiration. So a British artist influencing what happens, I think this is one of the things that's so exciting, the interchange of arts. The influences are very wide. Looking at the costume itself, I think one of the first things to be aware of is the fact that this Salome is not a Salome where she is divesting herself of a series of veils. And in fact, with this costume, when Karsavina first appears in the work, she has an enormous train, which is so Beardsley-esque. That is then removed, and you find this very risqué costume underneath, giving an idea of revealing the breasts was something completely unheard of in particularly the ballet stage at the time like this. And in a way, when one looks at this with the flowers all around the side, you've almost got that sort of extra weight that comes in an Edwardian costume, the heavier bodice that comes in, and then revealing in the middle. So there's a real sort of sense of contrast there. I mean, I just think it's a wonderful idea of having the little orange stars to sort of represent the nipples. And then, of course, it's done with a mesh in between. So this would be giving us, again, a sense of nudity. So as you can see, this is basically a pair of culottes with totally asymmetrical legs. It's something that was really not that usual at the time. I mean, now dancers will be performing in shorts all over the place, but this is something that really was very different. It's always fascinating to realise how dancers sort of actually put on their costumes. So with this, quite clearly, she would have stepped into the culottes, pulled it up, put the sleeves on, and then probably her dresser would have fixed the hooks and eyes. It's always hooks and eyes in costumes. They are much more reliable than anything else. Dancers do sometimes like to be sewn into their costumes, but there's no evidence here that that was the case with this costume. It's remarkable for the range of fabrics that are used. We've got obviously the net, and then this is a crepe for the shoulder pieces. The flowers, which I think are sort of a cotton and then painted. They've lost a lot of their paint. We have the silks for the main part of the costume, and then we have these gold metallic threads, so those would have sort of sung. There's a lot of detail in these bands that we only just read really as a white band to the audience, but the quality that goes into making these costumes I think is phenomenal. The gold fabrics are very, very typical of the Ballets Russes. And of course, this is a period when theatre lighting is coming into focus. Diaghilev himself supervised the lighting on productions. And so the range of fabrics, the silks, the gold threads, they're all going to be picked up by the light. So, and then of course there's sort of detail with the shoulders, not just straightforward shoulder straps. They've been sort of cut to give an effect that would have stood out, of course, against the dancer's flesh. And also we have just little leaves of gold that again would have picked up the light. On the back also you had some of these sort of little mother of pearl beaded decorations, large beads. I think they were probably more on the back. There's one down the bottom there. It's just little details, but all the details add up to make a really exciting costume. One of the things that has happened with this costume is that it does have a significant tuck in it. You can sort of get a sense of more fabric there than you would probably need. So initially, quite obviously, this leg would have hung down longer. It's not the case of two dancers wearing a costume and it needs to be adapted, as happens with some costumes. I'm convinced that Karsavina would have sort of said, no, sorry, it's too long. I'm going to trip over it. I can't dance. And this is something that happens. You will have conversations between dancers and costumiers to make sure things are comfortable. So under here, we've actually got an elastic. It looks like a piece of cord now, but it's tired elastic. This is what always happens with elastic. And so this is there really to keep the longer side down and hold it on the leg. And you get the sort of sense that there is a contrast, the sort of the leg that is more covered, and then picking up again with the flowers, the wonderful orange. I mean, the whole colour palette here is, I just think, absolutely stunning. And then on this leg, Karsavina had a flower painted on her thigh and another flower down below. And these were actually painted on. When Sudeikin was available, he would come to the theatre and actually paint it on. It would draw attention to the nudity. So we've actually got some wonderful photographs of Salome, including this wonderful image of Karsavina in her cape, and it's obviously twisted round and hung over some sort of barrier that they've put up, because the photograph is taken, you can see, from the edge in the green room at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. So this is obviously the time of the first performance. But many people sort of think that the background is the setting, but it's not, it's the cape. And the cape must have been absolutely vast, because when you look at the photograph of the set, you'll see a sort of triangular staircase, which is huge. And if the cloak is covering the whole of that, it must have been wonderful. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to exist. Essentially, this costume seems to have made considerable impact. I think it's fascinating that it appears in a Punch cartoon, for example, in 1914. So that's the second year when it's being performed. It's been treated as if this is modern bathing dress. And you've got to think about bathing dress at the time was quite long, not very revealing of the body. So to have this as an example for the woman, and alongside that to have the costume that was created for Václav Nijinsky, all over body tights essentially, in L'après-midi d'un faune for the man. But what is so interesting is that the impact of the Ballets Russes is that strong, that it is picked up and used for cartoons. It's also fascinating that, again, in 1914, Paul Poiret creates a fashion item that he calls Salome. It's layered, it's not a copy of this, but you can see the influence of it. But it also has little orange decorations that suggest the nipples, so it sort of comes through. And then these sort of costumes for the Ballets Russes, actually have a very lasting impact. Fashion designers see them, get excited by the ideas that were coming through at the beginning of the century, and then a century later reinterpret them themselves. This costume is really a one-off. There is nothing else quite like it. It's very important within our collection of the Ballets Russes. I think it's also very important to our understanding of Tamara Karsavina. She was somebody who was very influential in the development of dance in Britain. She performs, she becomes a star, but she uses her ability to nurture the successive generations and inspire them.